Socrates, what if everything you believe to be true is actually false? What if the wisest among us are those who recognize their own ignorance? Socrates, they sentence me to death for asking questions. Is that not the greatest irony of all? To kill a man for pursuing truth. Socrates, laughing, and yet, even as I drink the hemlock, I remain the freest man in Athens. How strange that my death would ensure my ideas live forever. Socrates, greetings, fellow seekers of wisdom. I am Socrates, though I suspect you already knew that from the thumbnail showing me drinking from the infamous cup of hemlock. Light chuckle, a dramatic image, is it not? But perhaps less dramatic than the truth it represents. In today's dialogue, we shall examine a most peculiar subject, myself. Though I find this somewhat uncomfortable, as I've always preferred questioning others to speaking of my own affairs. Nevertheless, together we'll explore how a simple stone-cutter's son became both the foundation of Western philosophy and such a threat to Athens that its leaders felt compelled to silence me. By the end of our time together, you'll understand how my method of questioning, what later generations would call the Socratic method, revolutionized human thinking, and why, over 2,000 years later, it remains the most powerful tool for discovering truth and exposing falsehood. I was born in Athens around 470 BCE to a stonemason father and a midwife mother. A fitting parentage, perhaps, as I would later describe my own method as a form of intellectual midwifery, helping others give birth to ideas that were already within them. But tell me this, if you agree that knowledge of historical facts differs from wisdom, press that like button. For as we proceed, we must distinguish between what is known and what is merely believed about me. Athens during my lifetime was experiencing its golden age, a democracy flourishing under Pericles, victorious against the Persian Empire, and producing unprecedented achievements in architecture, drama, and the arts. Yet it was also a society built on slavery, restricted citizenship, and frequent warfare. Earlier you may have assumed I was merely a thinker, yet I served as a hoplite, a heavily armed foot soldier, in several battles during the Peloponnesian War. At Potidaea, I even saved the life of the young Alcibiades, later walking barefoot through snow while other soldiers shivered in their winter boots. My physical endurance became as legendary as my mental stamina. Isn't it remarkable how we separate the mind and body in our understanding of historical figures? As if philosophers must be frail creatures concerned only with abstract thought. Perhaps we might reconsider this assumption. Socrates, what truly set my path apart was what I called my daemonion, a divine sign or inner voice that would warn me against certain actions. This peculiar experience began after my friend Chaerephon visited the oracle at Delphi and was told no one was wiser than Socrates. Can you imagine my astonishment? I knew myself to be ignorant of so much. This contradiction demanded investigation. So I began questioning those reputed to be wise, politicians, poets, craftsmen, only to discover they merely presumed knowledge they did not possess. Their certainty was their greatest ignorance. Meanwhile, I at least knew what I did not know. Consider your own life for a moment. Where might you be assuming knowledge you don't actually possess? If this question makes you uncomfortable, you're experiencing precisely what my fellow Athenians felt when I questioned them. Type "examined" in the comments if you've ever had a cherished belief collapse under scrutiny. This realization became the foundation of my approach. I know that I know nothing. not a declaration of complete ignorance, but rather an acknowledgement of the vast expanse of potential knowledge beyond my grasp. True wisdom begins with this humility. Socrates, let us examine together what later generations would call the Socratic method, though I simply considered it honest conversation. The process begins with a question about a concept my conversation partner believes they understand: justice, courage, piety, or love. I then feign ignorance, asking them to educate me on the subject. As they offer their definition, I ask further questions that reveal contradictions or inconsistencies in their thinking. This process, called elenchus or cross-examination, continues until they reach aporia, a state of healthy confusion where they recognize their previous confidence was unfounded. If you're finding value in understanding this method that has shaped education, law, and scientific inquiry for millennia, take a moment to subscribe to continue our philosophical journey together. What follows from this state of confusion? Unlike modern teachers who might immediately provide the correct answer, I believe truth must be discovered rather than delivered. Through dialectic, collaborative reasoning, we would reconstruct a more coherent understanding together. Perhaps the most important aspect of my method is that it treats the other person not as an empty vessel to be filled, but as someone already pregnant with knowledge, needing only assistance in giving birth to their own insights. This is why I was so deeply offended by the sophists who charged money to teach rhetoric. They offered techniques to persuade regardless of truth, while I sought truth regardless of where it led. The difference is profound and remains relevant in your era of alternative facts and persuasion technologies. Socrates, the inscription at Delphi, "Know thyself," became central to my philosophical project. But what does self-knowledge truly entail? I believed that examining one's own beliefs and values is the foundation of all other knowledge. Without understanding the lens through which we perceive reality, how can we trust our perceptions? Earlier, you may have thought philosophy is primarily about abstract concepts, but I maintain that its ultimate purpose is practical: to live well. The unexamined life is not worth living was not hyperbole but my deepest conviction. If you agree that self-reflection remains essential in today's distracted world, show your support with a like. Let me ask you a question that has echoed through millennia. Is it better to suffer injustice or to commit it? Many of my fellow Athenians found my answer disturbing. It is always better to suffer injustice than to commit it. For when we act unjustly, we damage our own soul, the very essence of who we are. The person who commits injustice, even if never caught or punished, carries their own corruption within them. Socrates, what happens when a society can no longer tolerate persistent questioning of its fundamental assumptions? My life provides the answer. In 399 BCE, at approximately 70 years of age, I was charged with 2 crimes: impiety and corrupting the youth of Athens. The charges were politically motivated. Athens had recently restored its democracy after a brief oligarchic coup led by some associated with my circle. The irony was palpable. I, who spent my life encouraging reverence for truth above all else, stood accused of impiety. I, who sought to guide young people toward virtue through critical thinking, charged with corrupting them. During my trial, rather than begging for mercy as was customary, I continued to question the very premises of the proceedings. When asked to propose my own punishment, I suggested, perhaps unwisely, laughs that Athens should provide me free meals for life in recognition of my service to the city. The The jury found me guilty by a relatively narrow margin, but my uncompromising attitude during the penalty phase sealed my fate. They sentenced me to death by drinking hemlock. If you find yourself moved by this commitment to principle over self-preservation, consider sharing this video with someone who might appreciate the example. Socrates, my friends arranged an escape, yet I refused. If you've seen the thumbnail of me with the hemlock cup, you now understand the choice it represents. By accepting the verdict, I demonstrated that I valued Athens and its laws even when they failed me. To flee would contradict my life's teachings about justice and integrity. My death transformed me from a gadfly irritating the powerful into a martyr for intellectual freedom. My student Plato would establish his academy and develop a comprehensive philosophical system. Later, Aristotle would build upon and often challenge these ideas, creating intellectual foundations that would shape Western civilization for millennia. What follows from my example? Perhaps that questioning authority is both dangerous and necessary. That knowing the limits of your knowledge is the beginning of wisdom. That the pursuit of truth requires courage as well as intellect. As we conclude our dialogue, let me pose one final question. If the unexamined life is not worth living, what aspects of your own life might benefit from closer examination? I've always believed that philosophy is not a spectator sport, but a practice requiring participation. So I invite you to continue this conversation in the comments below, sharing how you might apply the Socratic method in your own pursuit of wisdom. If you found value in our dialogue today, subscribe to join future philosophical explorations. Next week, we'll examine how my students Plato and Aristotle developed competing visions that would shape Western thought for millennia. Until then, remember, true wisdom begins not with certainty, but with wonder.